Father Daniel Doctor. Do you prefer Father Doctor or Father Daniel?
Well, I prefer Father Dan.
Father Dan.
Yes, because, well, it's very confusing if your last name being Doctor, that
Yes.
especially with children. And then when I was Deacon Dan Doctor, then it was even more confusing because they didn't know if I was a doctor, if I was a deacon. So now it's just Father Doctor. They don't know if I might have a PhD or whatever. So, but that is my last name, so it's spelled just like a doctor, D-O-C-T-O-R. But yeah, there's a lot of family stories.
Father Dan is the best.
That's the best, because that doesn't confuse anybody that I don't have a PhD.
So you don't have no PhD in theology or anything like that?
A master's, but not PhDs.
Father Dan, welcome to In The Pews.
Thank you.
You are new here, somewhat new here, to the Houston area.
Yes.
Right? You come from out of town. You're here. Are you retired, semi-retired, or just moving?
Well, in the process now, I'm relocated to Texas.
Okay.
So I'm helping out at the Archdiocese with anything they would need, mostly now just Mass coverage and confession coverage and stuff like that, all around the deanery, which I'm in, which is the Blue Bonnet Deanery, because I live in Belleville.
Okay.
But yeah, I'll help out anywhere in the diocese where they need the help. And then I have come from the Diocese of Kalamazoo, Michigan. And so while I'm living here for medical reasons, I help out and then see what I can do.
So technically you are now under the Archdiocese of Galveston, Houston, or you're still sort of associated with Michigan?
No, I'm still incarnated in the Diocese of Kalamazoo, Michigan, and then I'm going to leave from there. While on the leave, I'm helping here in the diocese.
So just on leave, just here to help?
Yes.
Okay. So long term, you may go back?
Well, for us in our diocese, we can retire at the age of 70, where I think in the Archdiocese it's 75. So I can retire in 9 years from now. So depending on medical reasons, if I have to retire early for that, or what some of my doctors have suggested that I might have to move more into the desert climate for my allergies, so like closer to Phoenix or something like that. So they said, give this 5 years and see what happens.
So you're here because of health reasons?
Yes.
Okay. You said allergies.
Well, my unique condition is that not only do I have severe allergies, both food, environmental, and all those, but I am allergic to most of the medications. So I cannot be medicated for the allergies. So the only way I can really do anything is by avoidance, is by just avoiding the allergens itself.
Okay.
So, and I inherited that from both sides of my family. From my mom and my dad were both highly allergic to medication.
For some reason, I'm thinking of like Doc Holliday coming down south, you know?
It's pretty bad.
Yeah, to avoid the weather up there.
And that's a unique situation, being a priest, that, you know, everybody wants to invite you over to their home.
Yes.
And I always have to decline because it's two problems. One, I have food allergies, so I don't know what I'm going to be served. And then you hate saying to people, well, here's the list of things you cannot serve me, you know. And then the environmental, you don't know if they have animals, which I'm allergic to, you know, so it can be painful to go to somebody's house and walk out of there. It looks like somebody beat me with a baseball bat because I'm all swollen from the allergies. So it's best to just say, well, I'll meet you in a restaurant, because then the environment and the food is controlled.
Yes. Yeah.
But it's hard as a priest because everybody always wants you to come over to their home.
Of course.
It's like, and if you say you have allergies, people look at you like, sure. You know, like, sure you do.
They're like, I've got allergies too.
That excuse don't work, Father. So
you're in the Diocese of Michigan, but you didn't grow up in Michigan, right?
No, I grew up in Griffith, Indiana, which is a small little town. Well, when I grew up, it was, and it bordered Gary on one side, so it was within the Chicago land area. So we were considered the Calumet region. So the typical, we were called region rats.
Region rats?
Region rats, because we lived in the Calumet region.
Okay. That's the first time I've heard that.
Really? Okay. Yeah.
Maybe up in that area, everybody knows that term.
Yeah, it was, now they don't use it anymore because it's kind of not a nice term, but that's what we were called because we came from the region.
Did you grow up Catholic?
Yes. My father was Catholic, but my mother converted. But we all were baptized, and my brothers and sisters and I were all baptized we had a good strong Catholic community and a Catholic school. For my early childhood, I don't ever remember knowing anyone like relatives, friends, family friends, anybody that wasn't Catholic. So it was just totally immersed in the Catholic culture.
The whole community was pretty much Catholic.
Yeah, and it was amazing because when we would go later on, they didn't have a Catholic high school, so we had to go to the public high school. Well, about a quarter of the kids were all coming from the Catholic school, so you immediately had like this club, this group of Catholics, even going into the public school, that you still kept that Catholic community.
Also, from the middle school, just the whole influx of Catholics
into the public system
and the high school level. Now, you said your mom converted. Did they have a whole RCIA process back then, or
not then? Because I think she converted in 1950, so she had one-on-one with the priest.
So it's like a more of an informal formation type thing, maybe.
Yeah, and like most of it was like a lot of her questions because she was Lutheran, so she already had the biblical background.
Mm-hmm.
She could do something that I didn't know any Catholic moms could do, is she could give you all the books of the Bible just off the top of her head in order. And then when she turned Catholic, she added the Bible, the books that were missing. So she had the correct Bible when she did it, but people were impressed by that. But anyways, yeah, she had to go through one-on-one with the priest. And then my dad was in the military at that time in the Korean War, so she did this all, and he had no clue that she was turning Catholic.
Wow.
And so when he came home on leave, it was around Easter time, and that's when the priest had arranged it, that she became Catholic. And then they got married 2 months or 3 months later.
Wow, that's fantastic.
So yeah, it was interesting. But in those days, it was, I guess, hard for her because most of her family was very staunch Lutherans, so they didn't take it well that she converted to Catholicism.
Did she say anything about any Catholic beliefs or concepts that she had trouble, grasping or coming to terms with when she converted?
Not really when she converted, but I guess after my education of all my years of study, it was like I noticed that she sometimes had a very extreme difficulty with the concept that Jesus was God. He's Savior, all the things we'd say, but to say he is like God, that God is the Father.
Yes.
And Jesus is part of the Trinity. He's God too. But that was always seemed difficult for her to that concept of that Jesus was Lord and Savior, not just Savior. So I don't know if it was a product of her own experience or what she experienced in the Lutheran Church. I don't know, but she seemed to have problems with that. But she was always very devoted, being a mother, to that concept. So Mary was, most people say they have a difficulty with Mary, but she never seemed to have that difficulty.
Was your family really involved in the church when you were growing up? Were you an altar boy?
Well, we were all my brothers and I were altar boys. Yes, we were taught by Franciscan nuns. So if you went to school in 4th grade, you automatically were an altar boy.
It was just a rite of passage.
You had no choice. And even the kids that came there that were not Catholic, they were altar boys. So they didn't receive Holy Communion, but they still had their turn. So that nun then, if you showed that you were better at it, say, than others, or you were more interested or showed up or whatever her criteria was, when you were in 5th grade, then she would teach you how to be a sacristan. And so she taught you everything you had to do to set up for Mass, how to set up the missal and all that, and how to set up for the chalice and the wine and all those things. And then if you showed even more proficiency, then she would start to show you how to take care of the stuff, the altar linens, how to change the candles out, all the, how to get wax off of everything.
Oh, wow.
So it was and then she could darn anything with a needle. That was just amazing. Just watch her in a few seconds. She'd repair all the corporals and everything like that. It was just amazing learning from somebody like that.
Nuts and bolts and every little thing, huh?
So that's when I became a priest in more rural areas where you didn't have sacristans and stuff like that. It's I can do this. I've been doing it since 4th grade. So. But yeah, it was
That's
very
awesome.
good. It was good about her was it wasn't just for the girls, to repair or do the linens.
Mhm.
No, the boys have to learn too, and it wasn't just for the boys to, have to remove the wax. The girls had to get in there too. So it was very educational and very how the lay community prepared the church for the priest to come and then to do the sacraments. So it was all that background work that sometimes people take for granted because they don't know what's going on.
Yeah, yeah.
They just come there for Mass. They don't realize all the work it took to get that ready for Mass.
Yeah, everything from behind the scenes. Yeah, exactly.
And the people who have to read and the musicians and all that have to get ready.
When you were that young, was there any inkling that you'd become a priest? Any thought?
Oh, yeah. My vocation goes back probably to when I was 5 years old.
Really?
When I was a quite hyper child. I was the fifth out of six. So it was a summer at that time, and I think it was the summer of 1969. No music reference there, but and I had gotten up early, and my mom said, if she does not wrangle me somehow, I will wake up the whole house. So she said outside, and my next door neighbor was having a garage sale, which, as being 5 years old, I had never been to a garage sale, so she was still setting everything up, and I walked over there, and in the corner was this statue of Our Lady of Grace, probably about 7 or 8 inches, and it was covered with cobwebs, and it was just over in the corner, and I thought to myself, that looks like the one that's in our church, because we went to St. Mary's, and there was Our Lady of Grace was the statue at church. So I said, well, is that for sale? And she said, yes. So it was like 4 pennies. So I immediately went home, didn't have 4 pennies, got 4 pennies from my mom, took the statue of Mary, took her home, gave her a bath, got all the cobwebs off of her. She was missing like 3 fingers on each hand, and then that statue was with me my whole life. Everywhere I've gone, that statue has been with me.
You still have it?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was amazing because at that time there was in my mind, a very chivalrous, I'm going to just save Our Lady from the doom of a garage.
And the cobwebs and the dirt and all
that she deserves something better than that. But then later in life, I could see how she was actually choosing me, and really my choice had nothing to do with it, just my free will. But she was directing things.
Did anyone at that age say, oh, you're going to become a priest?
Not so much at that age, but I would play priest, I'd secretly play priest. I wouldn't like openly do it. I'd line up my, stuffed animals, my sister's Barbies, and give them homilies and stuff like that. But no, not so much at that age. Later then, I think because of being an altar server and being seen more than people would comment, like aunts or uncles would comment about, that. But like I said, in my family, there was no one on my dad's side who ever had a religious vocation that we know of.
Okay.
And then on my mom's side, of course, being Protestant, there was no Catholic. There were ministers, but not any Catholic vocation.
So you pretty much broke the mold for both sides.
Yes, pretty much.
Okay.
Well, I was the first, just put it that way.
Okay. Yes, I think it's a better way of putting it.
Yeah, because who knows who's going to come next.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And then you said that you went into a public school system. Did that kind of challenge your faith in any way?
Well, what had happened, and this is probably a good lesson for parents more than anything else. What happened to me was when I was in high school, my grades weren't very good. So I would say I was more probably a BC student.
Okay.
And the guidance counselors at those times said that if that's your grades, you shouldn't go to college. You're not smart enough to go to college.
They pretty much told you that?
Well, and you should lean towards, inland steel was big in that area. So you should learn towards some kind of trade because why invest into college and you're just going to flunk out and go to a trade school anyways, I guess was their mentality. But anyways, that's the lesson for parents is don't let people tell your children what they can and cannot do. Because that more or less ended my vocation in my mind, because I knew to be a priest, you had to go to college.
Okay.
So if I'm not smart to go to college, well, then I'm not smart to be a priest.
So at that point, you actually thought about becoming a priest, entering high school and going through
if anybody would have asked me, what do you want to be when you grow up, it would have been a priest. Would have been my answer. But at that point, once I realized I wasn't smart enough to be one, well, then I had to be something else. So then the vocation just went on the back burner.
Wow, just because of these counselors that told you. Wow.
Yeah, because I didn't have no confidence. Well, they know better than I didn't have no confidence that I could, because I was a CB student. Okay. It wasn't like, I was straight A's and they were saying you can't do it. So I didn't have, I guess, the confidence at that level.
Did you ever go to, your pastor or anybody and share with them the fact that you wanted to become a priest? And
at that point, my pastor knew it, but he was always pushing me towards a diocesan vocation. And at that, when I was in high school, I was more interested in a religious vocation. So I was more interested in the Carmelites or the Dominicans more than. So he didn't necessarily like that idea. So he wanted me more to be pushed towards the.
Now, through high school, you still have in the back of your mind you wanted to become a priest. Did you date? Did you?
Yeah, I went through all we went through all the normal things of high school, and then even later in college. But there was no difference in, I would say, than me from anybody else, except that this constant inkling that this was my true vocation, but I didn't know exactly how that was going to work, because for some reason God didn't give me the intelligence to be a priest. So
it was just a vague, you wanted to kind of become a priest or religious in some way.
Well, yeah, and if it's somehow God's gonna have to work this out, because if it's a requirement of intelligence, either he's going to have to zap me with that, or somehow he's gonna have to work out this, because at this point I already was convinced that I wouldn't be able to get in.
Wow.
So what I did is, when I graduated from high school, I applied to Indiana University, one of the satellite colleges in Gary, and just started taking night classes just to get my, the requirements out of the way, like English, math, stuff like that.
Just those basic subjects.
The basic stuff. And then I was working full time at the time. Now, what I did is, I had two probably major careers in my 20s. In the daytime, I was working as a graphic artist. Back in the day, because in my high school, you had an opportunity to go through a whole graphic arts department where they taught you how to develop film, darkroom work, everything. There's no real computers at that point too much. So they taught you all that kind of stuff for either the newspaper or for the yearbook. So there was a good experience that then later gave me a job. So I worked in that industry for a while until when I was about 27, when personal computers started coming out, and then the printing industry took a huge hit. So I was laid off from that. But in the nighttime, my sister had worked as a waitress. So I started working in restaurants, started as a busboy, then as a waiter, then became a bartender, went to a banquet manager, and then I worked for Mike Ditka's in Chicago and in Maryville, Indiana, where he had two restaurants. I worked as his banquet manager the one in Indiana for a while. And then he was lost, he wasn't coach of the Bears no more. So those two places closed. So I was left with no job at all, where I had really no skill and no job. So the Northwest Indiana Carpenters Association was taking tests for the carpenter apprenticeship program.
Wow, you've been all over, huh?
Yeah. So a friend of mine said, well, let's just go and try and see if we can apply. And I'm thinking, well, I'm not smart enough, to go to college, so I'm probably not going to score higher on this test. So what I did is I got all the formulas that I needed for the geometry part of the quest. And I taped them to my truck where my radio was. And I wouldn't start my car until I could do all the formulas every morning.
Wow.
And I did that for like 3 months. So I could see these formulas in my sleep. So the day when I go to take the test, I would just look at the question, and as soon as I knew what formula it was, I'd stop reading the question, and in the margin, I'd write the formula and go to the next one. And so I did all the formulas first, and then went back and plugged in the math. Well, I scored the highest ever in
Wow.
the test. And the guy was like, I think you know the formulas, because they could see that I had done that first. So he's like, we won't take you into the program. And I said, well, why? He goes, we'll lose you to college, because guys usually score this high should be in college. And so why aren't you in college? So I told him the whole story. I'm not smart enough to be in college. And he's like, I don't know what you think, but yeah, you are smart enough to be in college. So then I was like, well, okay. So, I got to get a job if I'm going to go to college. So my sister was getting her accounting degree at this liberal arts college, St. Joseph's College in Rensselaer, Indiana. And she said, well, they're hiring in the maintenance department. Maybe you could just apply there. So when I applied there, they saw my resume and they's like, no, we're not going to hire you. We want to hire you in student affairs. And the reason why was because of my background with alcohol, that I would be perfect to work with college kids. That's what they said.
Background with alcohol?
Because I had worked in bars, restaurant
yes,
manager,
that's right. Yes,
all that.
That's right.
That it was like, well, you have experience in this sector of the world, so they hired me. And I worked my way just a little bit into campus life, and then took over where I had the RAs and everybody else answering to me. But one of the packages that came with the benefits was I get to go to college for free. So I thought, well, if I go to college for free, maybe I could do this. Maybe I'm smart enough.
Make it work out.
So I sat down with a counselor there, to figure out what classes I wanted to take. And so he said, well, what direction what kind of degree do you want? What do you want to do in the future? So I said, well, I want to be a priest. And he said, well, they don't have no degree in theology at St. Joe, but we have an undergrad in philosophy, which would, definitely open the door. So I said, okay. I said, well, listing on the courses, what is the hardest course that I would have to take in my whole 4 years here? What would be the hardest? And they had a core program where you had to go start as a freshman with core 1, and it fulfilled all your obligations, like your history, your English, your math, your science, and it was all literature, all jumbled into a course system where you had to take these course classes, and then so core 10 would technically be the hardest. So I said, can I take that first? And he said, since you are a staff member, you're not really a student, you don't have to follow the rules. So yeah, I can put you in that class. And I said, okay. So I rolled in that class and I got an A-.
Wow.
So I was like, I think I can do this. So within 4 years, I graduated and working full-time too, graduated with a bachelor's in philosophy with honors.
Wow. Shame on those counselors. Looking back at them and, what they said to you, do you think they might have just been wanting to feed people into that system, that whole steel system? And
I don't know, because the day I graduated from college, I sat there before I had to go up and get to my diploma and just bawled my eyes out. Because I was like, I wasted like 10 years.
Yeah.
I should be sitting here at 23, not at 28.
Yeah. And also the fact that you thought that would never happen.
Right.
Wow.
So I had a good priest there who was a good advisor, and he said, well, I don't advise that you go and you don't know where you want to go yet. I didn't know if diocesan, and the college was run by the Missionaries of the Precious Blood. They were like really a kind of a dying order. They have sold St. Joseph's College now. It's not even open anymore.
Oh, wow.
And so he didn't think that would be a good idea, but he said, you should just go on and get a master's, because if you can get a master's, you should have no problem in the seminary, and you should then finally beat this belief that you're not smart enough. So I rolled into St. Louis University's graduate program in historical theology. Now, I wanted a degree in spirituality, but the problem with it is most spirituality programs were starting to stop in 2000. Now it's almost impossible to find one.
Really?
If you wanted just a master's in spirituality, they're hard to find. You have to go through the department in a different way. Like, you have to get your master's in theology, concentrating in spirituality.
Wow.
But you can't just... And now most everything on the academic level is, because his history is 2,000 years. It's so hard to say I have a degree in church history, because to know that much information. So now everything has been divided up into sections. We have historical theology degrees in either medieval or modern or postmodern or whatever to break it down, because it's almost impossible for one person to know 2,000 years of church history. It's just impossible.
So this whole time that you know, from high school onwards, you were kind of thinking, for a great majority of that time, you were thinking you weren't going to be able to become a priest. Did you actually explore or think about, you know, dating and getting married? And was there a girl that, you know, probably you would have settled down with?
I would say in my 20s, when I was still, you know, either working as, you know, in restaurants or as a graphic artist, I did have time to date in that time, but I never found anybody that. The only way I could put it is I never found anybody that could replace what I had already found in God. That there was something already that nothing could really, no human being could add up to or give me that kind of completion that only God could. And it couldn't be just, you know, I'm going to find completion in marriage life and God. It was going to be God alone. And at that point, I had, from about the age of, it was started, I think, in 6th grade, that I started reading the lives of the saints so much. And just in my own directing myself, which you never do, but as a teenager, I don't know that. Just in the way I looked at life, I looked at it more that it was going to be a religious vocation. I wasn't called to. I wasn't called to marital love in the same way that I was called to divine intimacy.
So the biggest obstacle for you was just that mindset, that complex that you thought that you weren't good enough intellectually. It wasn't, you know, because some priests, the biggest obstacle for them is the celibacy thing, you know.
Right.
But for you, it was that, getting over that, thinking that you weren't good enough, that you weren't smart enough when you actually were.
Right, and then that was, you know, something that even theology of the body and as well in the seminary, you know, that your spiritual director talks to you about is, do you feel called to be celibate? Because that's part of the call to priesthood. It's not separate, it's part of it. And I said that was never really the difficulty.
Yeah.
It was more the intellectual thing. And then once I realized I had the intellectual thing, then it was like, well, then how is God going to work this out? Because I'm already in my late 20s, early 30s.
You thought the ship had sailed?
Not so much that, but how, where, who, you know, diocesan, you know, religious. So I went then to St. Louis for 2 years for my historical theology degree. And my concentration was, because it's either, you know, publish or perish at that level, I thought it would be unique if I would have a degree in something that would get me published easily as a guy. So I thought, well, you know, there's tons of guys in theology. What's going to be my unique thing? So what I started doing is I started comparing different women theologians, such as that my thesis was done on is Julian of Norwich and Catherine of Siena. And what the unique problem was that was occurring was that because of Athanasius' statement that wasn't assumed isn't saved, there became a heresy that if Jesus didn't assume femininity, women aren't saved. Now you can see this in the life of St. Catherine of Siena. Her father would not take her to Mass. Her father wouldn't take her to religious devotions, but he would take all his sons.
Wow.
And the reason was because this subconscious belief, well, you know, girls aren't saved anyway, so they don't need church. They don't need the sacraments. So Catherine fights tremendously against this. And at the same time, you have Julian of Norwich. These two women never met, lived at the same time, and were fighting against the same problem that was occurring in the church. And because of their work, now we don't even have that argument anymore, or you don't hear anybody ever discussing it, because they corrected the problem by just saying he did assume it, because he assumed all flesh.
Yes.
Women are part of all flesh. Therefore, he assumed it. But they had to come up with a theological argument to prove their point. They couldn't just say, no, you're wrong. They had to argue against men who had way more education than they did.
So you wrote on
that issue.
Okay.
So that was my master thesis then. And then when I was it was right before John Paul II came to St. Louis, because I was a grad student at that time. I can't remember when that was. It was around the 2000, around the turn of the century, right there. And I was walking. I had stayed on campus over the summer to get caught up in some of my Latin work because I had to have Latin proficiency for my degree. So when I was going back to class, my apartment, there was this huge statue of Juniper Sarin right there.
Okay.
So I'm walking past it, and I get this like audible sound that says, "Do you believe everything the Catholic Church teaches?" And so I stopped walking. I thought to myself,
like you heard that.
Yes. And I thought to myself, well, yeah. I couldn't, going through my mind, thinking of everything that I had learned at that point, was there anything I had an objection to? No, I believe everything that I've been taught. What now? And the overwhelming answer was priesthood. So that night, I called my friend, who was a vocation director of the Diocese of Gary, and said, I think I need to start filling out all the paperwork to become a priest. And he's like, okay. He said, you call me at a good time, we can probably get you in August. So then I would start, I'd finish my 2 years at St. Louis and then go right in.
To the fall semester.
Right.
Wow.
So, and then he said the whole problem too was they had no clue where they would put me in the program because I was already way too educated at that point for the program. So here I go from not being smart enough to being too educated. So it's like, I can't win.
Did you ever think of getting a doctorate in theology? Being doctor?
Yeah. Well, it was funny because Bishop Videron, who was the rector of the seminary in Detroit at the time, he was like, if you were at the Archdiocese of Detroit, I would demand that they keep you going in education so that you could be doctor, because he thought it was just hilarious.
Yeah. That would be something else.
Maybe, who knows, but not yet. So anyways, when I went to the seminary, because I had so much education that I was able then to skip some classes because I didn't have to take any history classes because I already had that done, at St. Louis. So in that extra time I had, I thought, well, I might as well get another master's degree. So not only did I get my master's in divinity, but then I finally got my MA in spirituality like I wanted to.
Okay.
And then that was in Teresa of Avila on her understanding of the Our Father in the way of perfection. And then that was my master's thesis for that.
So instead of a doctorate, you've got 2 master's degrees.
Well, 3.
3 now.
I have my MA in historical theology from St. Louis, and then my MDiv at the seminary, and then my master's in Teresa.
So how many years did you spend in seminary, given the fact that you've had all this, education?
5 years.
Still 5 years?
Yeah.
So what did you do for those 5 years?
So I went through the normal program like everybody else did, the normal theology program, lived at the seminary, all that. But my classes were a little bit different because the first time I met with the professor from the history department, he was just like, you went to St. Louis, you don't take, I exempt you from all the classes. So it was like so that gave me like probably 18 credit hours right there of just open now. So I didn't want to just not do nothing. I could have done that, it would have been easier.
So mostly just formation through those 5 years?
Then it was all formation, and then it was all, your parish assignments, because I had to catch up stuff like that, because usually the undergrads, they always go to parishes in the summer. I had no experiences like that at all.
So during the school year, you spent a lot of time at the parishes? Is that how it worked? Or
yeah, and then what I did is 2 of my years I stayed at Detroit. I didn't go back to Gary to go home for the summer. I just stayed in Detroit and just did classes and was in the parish so that I had the extra time to get more immersed because,
so that's where you're playing catch up with parish life.
Exactly.
Okay.
because that's the experience I didn't have that other seminarians would have had.
Now, here in Galveston, Houston, we have that diaconate year where you're assigned to just one parish. Is that how it went for you as well?
Well, at the time, because the seminary system has changed a little bit. When I was in the seminary, you did your first 3 years of theology.
Okay.
Then you were ordained. You went home that summer and were ordained a deacon.
Okay.
Then you went back to the seminary for your last year as a deacon. So you were in the seminary during the week taking your classes, and then on the weekends you were assigned to a parish in the archdiocese to function as a deacon, which was usually just mass. They didn't have them doing weddings or baptisms or anything like that.
Okay.
And then after they got done with that year, then they were ordained a priest.
Okay.
So for me, I did the 3 years. The bishop wanted me to wait and do my 4th year. Okay. So I did it not as a deacon. I was a non-deacon for my last year. And then when I graduated, I then was ordained a deacon, then did a whole year in a parish like they do now here, and then was ordained a priest.
Which parish was that?
Oh, it was St. Joseph's in Battle Creek, Michigan, where they make the cereal for Kellogg's. There's somebody that makes cereal in Battle Creek, Michigan.
Post or something, one of those companies. Okay.
Yeah.
And what was that like? Now, this is like you're full-time at a parish now, right?
Right. It was awesome because the priest that what I worked with was like he became vicar of the schools, and he was trying to rejuvenate and enliven the schools, which is my passion, being education. But he was very dynamic, and I learned a lot from him about fundraising because he was really, really good at it. I mean, if he had you in that room, you were not leaving that room without writing him some check. I mean, he was just amazing at it. And you would think, like, that ain't going to work. You know, he would say, well, this is what we're going to do. No one's going to donate. No one. And he'd get, like, tens of thousands of dollars. And you'd be like, how does he do it? It was amazing. But he still does it today.
Wow.
He's very good at fundraising. And so it was good to train under him, you know, to see that side of it. Well, because I had no business experience or, you know, how to run a parish from the business side. That wasn't any experience I had. So all that had to be
So
learned.
that was the biggest learning thing for you during that time.
Yep.
Now, your time in the seminary, how old were you in those 5 years? You were...
Let's see, I would have entered this seminary. I was ordained at 41. So if you go back 5 years...
Yeah, so like 36 to 41 years old. So you're much older than most of the seminarians because you've got some guys coming out of high school, some just out of college, right?
Right.
Was that like a bit of adjustment for you being like the older guy?
It was in the sense that for us, I was part of what I guess they call now the John Paul II effect.
Okay.
That there were like 5 or 6 guys in the seminary that were around my age.
Okay.
Because there was a lot of, 2 of my good friends were late vocations.
Okay.
So, and then we had 3 Anglicans that were studying. They were already married and had families. I don't know how they did that. And then they had to come and stay in the seminary like 4 nights a week or something like that and take their classes because they were becoming Catholics.
Nice. Yeah, we've had an Anglican who convert on the show as well. He was telling about his unique experiences while being married.
Yeah, and it's just like, I don't know if I could do that. That'd be putting your wife through a lot.
So it wasn't that big of an adjustment. It wasn't like you were the odd man out, or anything like that.
And I think the odd thing for me was when I went to grad school, because I was always living in my own house. And then when I went to grad school, I had to live on campus, in an apartment. So it was like I was not used at all to dorm living, kind of campus living. So that was loud and not what I was used to. So that was probably the bigger adjustment. I think that helped me then to go to the seminary and have no problem at all.
Now, speaking of that, being loud and all of that, a lot of the younger seminarians or priests that we've talked to, and they said in their younger days when they went through seminary, there were a lot of pranks and hijinks. Were you involved in that, being one of the older guys, or were you more on the serious, let's get to business?
I had a friend who was my classmate across the hall from me, so he did all that, and I just let him do it. He had a picture of the bottle of Harp beer on his door.
Okay.
And then underneath it he had, "And I will solve all my problems on the harp," from the Psalms.
That's the kind of guy he was.
Yes. We had this, it was a 4-story building that we were in, built during the 20s. So you could go up to the very top attic and see outside.
Okay.
And somebody made a reference that it was the Bat Cave. Okay. To which this guy stayed up all night because it had snowed, and he had made the Batman symbol
on the snow.
In the snow. So when you were up in the 4th floor, you could look down and see it. But in the middle of the night, as he was doing this, one of the professors happened to be up and looked outside and saw this first-year guy stomping on snow at 3 a.m.
Okay.
So by 5 a.m, he was in the rector's office, like, "What's wrong with you? What are you doing?" So he took the rector up to the 4th floor and showed him what he did.
Oh, so the guy couldn't tell what he was doing.
No, he just thought he went nuts and just outside stomping on snow.
Like seminaries getting to this dude,
So, and then when the rector saw it, he was like, "Whoa," because it was impressive. But it was, at first, they thought for sure he was going home, a padded cell or something.
That would have been funny if the rector told him, "Okay, so next time, all right, do Our Lady of Guadalupe, all right?
Yeah,
let's see if you can
more
do that."
religious symbol than that,
rather than the bat symbol.
Right, there you go.
That's hilarious. Do you remember any of the other crazy things that he did?
Oh goodness, he was always pulling pranks.
Did he prank you?
No, I think because I was older, he left the older guys alone and just pranked the younger ones.
The younger ones who would take it a little better, I guess.
Well, and he said his patron saint was St. Lawrence, so you knew right away, patron saint of comedians. You knew there was a problem. But yeah, he was
hilarious.
a good guy.
Did he eventually go on to become a priest?
Yeah, he did. He was for the Archdiocese of Marquette up north.
Okay.
Those guys are unique anyways. But yeah, he had a unique story where he didn't know if he wanted to be a priest or not, and I guess the NFL was looking for him.
Oh, really?
He was that good.
Wow.
And so he told our Lord that, "Well, if you really want me to be a priest, blow my knee out, because then my career's over." And that game, he blew his knee out.
Wow.
And he told his family, and then he went and...
Was he playing for like a big college? Like,
it was something up north in Wisconsin or Michigan. It was something, I don't know for sure where he was at the time, but yeah, I was like, why didn't you just ask our Lord to be a millionaire? Blow out your knee.
Blow out your knee.
I mean, what did that do for you?
So any of the older guys that were with you said there were a few older guys. Did they become priests as well, and any of them discern out?
Most of everybody that was with me, it seems like my class, the two biggest, looking back now, because I was graduated in 05 and was ordained in 06 as a priest, 05 as a deacon. The guys that were in my class, because I had one of the biggest classes at the seminary, the two factors that have taken them out is either they've died, or they left the priesthood. But it was not before ordination; it was after ordination.
After.
So that would be the two biggest factors, and the death part comes in because most of my class were all pastors of multiple parishes. And two of the guys were driving from one parish to the other and fell asleep at the wheel.
Oh, wow. Just overworked, huh?
Yeah. So it was a big factor in why now they don't cluster as much as they used to, because they were seeing the adverse effect on the priests themselves.
And then you said leaving the priesthood?
Yeah. Just after years of service, just going. Usually, statistically, I think it's usually around the 7th year is when most marriages fail, when most vocations fail. And around that time, it's like that was when most left that I knew of.
What would be the number one reason for that? Would you know?
At that time, I don't know what it would have been, because there was nothing, unless it was the scandal, because the scandal broke with the whole new charter and stuff right in 90. Let's see, I entered the seminary in 2000. So that's when we had to go through classes on the whole charter and all that. So
And you're talking about the abuse scandal.
Yeah, I think that had a large effect. I don't know necessarily. See, being in the seminary, I was in Detroit, so I saw the effect on the Archdiocese of Detroit much more than I saw it on my own diocese because I wasn't there. And I didn't hear anything about anybody leaving in my diocese, but I did know priests that had left from the Archdiocese because of the scandal.
Must have been just really hard to be a priest after, all of that, huh?
Well, there were, I know priests that were spit on and stuff.
Wow.
And that's when my class, a lot of my classmates would not wear collar in public.
Oh, wow.
Because of comments or abuse.
Wow.
Yeah.
Even though you had nothing to do with it.
Right. And much more, I think it was much more in the cities because, like Detroit, because I didn't encounter that when I would go home in rural Kalamazoo diocese.
Wow. Wow, that's terrible.
Yeah. Now, we were only like, we're less than 10% Catholic in our diocese, in our counties of our diocese. So we're not very prominent that way, even though Notre Dame is technically in our backyard.
What do you remember from your ordination?
The thing that got me, and it was when my hands were consecrated. I'm left-handed.
Okay.
My bishop at the time, Bishop Murray, who ordained me, was left-handed. The majority of our priests in our diocese are left-handed. I don't know why this is. But when I put my hands out to be ordained, for him to pull the chrism into my hand, and on my left hand, he covered that hand like he didn't realize. It's dripping now onto the cloth below.
Okay.
My hand is covered. And then on my right hand, just the tiniest little drop. That was it. And then he's put my hands together. And I'm thinking, why is one hand
drenched?
covered? And then this hand is like intentionally one drop. So
He didn't tell you why?
Nope, not at all. So years later, I confronted him and asked him. And all he did was smile, and he would not say
He wouldn't
anything.
even tell you. Oh, gosh.
So I don't know if it was a bishop joke. I don't know if it was like he did this to everybody. But it was just like, because I was ordained with 4 other guys. So it was just like, did he do that? I didn't pay attention to anybody else. You're wrapped in your own moment. You're not watching what he's doing to other people. So it's just like, I don't know. And I talked to my other guys and they like, well, I didn't notice. But for me, it was just like overwhelmingly like, okay, he's intentionally only putting a drop on that hand. Why?
But he never told you.
Never told us. So I have no clue what that was supposed to mean.
So when you were ordained, because here, some of the guys, they're allowed to choose which saints are mentioned in the litany. Was that the same for you as well? Do you remember choosing any of the saints?
No, I don't. I don't remember that being part of like anything that we were like, because we had all filled all those preparation papers and all that stuff. Our diocese, my ordination was different in the sense that the year before we were ordained, we were the biggest class ever in the history of the diocese. There was 5 of us.
Okay.
And the year before was 3. And they, I guess, had did something during the ordination. The 3 guys to be ordained asked for something to be done in the liturgy that was done and granted, but apparently the music director and the bishop didn't know.
Okay.
And so they were really clamped down on the liturgy when we were ordained.
Okay.
Where we weren't like allowed too much input.
Okay.
So, and I think maybe being 5 of us, it was probably good because I don't think we could have agreed on.
But if you were to choose, let's say if you were to choose, these saints have to be in there, who would you choose?
Oh, wow. Well, probably my first off would be my namesake, Daniel. So I think Daniel in the Lion's Den should be mentioned.
Okay.
Then my other namesake, my middle name is Edward, so I'd want St. Edward the Confessor mentioned. But now, if you would ask me, I mean, at that time, that's probably what I would have said.
Uh-huh.
Now, if you would have asked me, because I have different devotion to different saints, I would probably mention other saints that aren't necessarily ordained.
Mm.
Because I can see the value now of how the laity play a role in your vocation that you don't understand when you're a seminary or when you're ordained. And so I think I would want to call on more lay saints so that I could be a better priest to lay people, instead of calling on ordained saints to be necessarily a better ordained person, if that makes sense. Because I think that when you get called in your vocation, it's a calling from God. But I think the only thing after ordination, because God can be awful quiet after that, is how you're reaffirmed by the lay people, how they enter into, in a weird way, they enter into that marriage relationship that you have with God, as much as children enter into that relationship between parents and their relationship with God. Because it's what Catherine of Siena says, is by going out and meeting the people of God, it then stimulates what you're going to pray for. Because if you're always stuck in yourself, well, you can always pray for what you want. But when you engage with other people, then you start seeing the needs that you have are really superficial compared to what other people are going through, especially as a priest, because, I mean, we're taken care of pretty well. We don't have to worry about health issues or, unless we have bad health. But I mean, we're taken care of in the sense of our income and our insurance and stuff like that, so that we have time then to enter into that. But
and you don't have a family to take care of and all that kind of thing. Yeah,
exactly. And that's what with the idea of married clergy, it's like, man, I think you would bankrupt the people of God, because you'd have to pay the priests way more if they have a wife and kids. Yeah. Because they got to support them too. Yeah. So it's best that, and then I don't think it's right to do that to a family, to have a priest so busy where he can't even show up for his family's, graduations and stuff like that, because
just making it home for dinner too is going to be a tough one too. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's better just to leave it the way it is because of that factor. But I think the underlying thing is that how much the clergy, how much the laity really play in forming their priests over the long term.
Speaking of forming you as a priest, so your first, I assume that you have a few assignments first as a parochial vicar, an associate pastor. How many of those did you have first before,
well,
as a young priest, as a beginning priest?
In our diocese, the typical time period was that you would be a parochial vicar for at least 7 to 10 years.
Okay. What was it different because you were older and had more experience in?
No, it's unless there was a shortage or a problem or, something had to be filled, everybody probably was going to be, like all my classmates and everything like it at Kalamazoo, you're going to be at least that long before, because we had enough priests at that point, because they had gone through and closed some parishes and missions, so it had tightened the amount of assignments. And then during that time, they wanted to make sure that you did every ministry that was possible in our diocese. So there was a minimum security prison. So you were going to be assigned to that town because that priest's responsibility was that. So you knew within the 10 years of your 10-year period,
you're going to hit up these things.
You're going to hit that parish. And then you're going to hit a parish that has a school, probably one that has a high school. There's 4 high schools in our diocese. Then you're going to hit one where there's going to be a major hospital. So you're going to have to, do hospital. So by the time that you would go to be a pastor, you already were a chaplain in a hospital, chaplain in a prison. chaplain of the parish, we've done chaplain for the Knights of Columbus. All those parish things you would already have done as a parochial vicar. So when you walk in as a pastor, you shouldn't have any major difficulty because you've already been in. Nothing should catch you off guard, at least.
So you had about 7 years bouncing between these different parishes, just absorbing it all. At any point, you said earlier that, you thought about joining an order. At any point, did you think about, hey, maybe I can shift into an order or anything?
No, I started with Gary, as a seminarian. And then after 2 years, they had a major, I'm not sure exactly because nothing was ever said to us, but they had a major difficulty in the diocese, and they revamped the whole vocations office. And the 8 seminarians they had, they just dismissed.
Oh, wow.
So I went to the Diocese of Kalamazoo because I had classmates that were part of that diocese, and showed him everything. And my diocese from Gary was willing to give me all the so they took me up, and then I went back to the seminary and then finished out what I had started at Gary, and then was ordained for the Diocese of Kalamazoo. So that's how I got into the diocese.
If ever you did leave, diocesan priesthood and entered into an order, which one would you?
Well, I would I feel called to the Dominicans because of my teaching background.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes.
So that is strong. And then my background in Teresa of Avila I would be interested in the Carmelites as well. Mm. But if it was a Carmelite, I would have to have some kind of teaching responsibility or something. Uh-huh. I wouldn't want to just be like a cloistered Carmelite without that side of my vocation, being a teacher.
I went to a college that was a Dominican, so
okay. Yeah. I'm very pro-Dominican.
Do you remember your first assignment as a pastor?
My first assignment as a pastor was St. Charles Borromeo in Coldwater, Michigan. So that means I had the prison as well.
Oh.
And that was probably one of my favorite assignments. The parish wasn't doing good. It had a long history, and because of the area, the church had been burnt down twice.
Burnt down?
Probably.
Intentionally? Like arson burnt down?
Yeah.
Wow.
Twice in its history. The first time was there was the Ku Klux Klan was coming to Notre Dame, and they were going to have a rally at the Central Park in South Bend. And the college students heard about it, and they were going to go and, run them off.
Uh-huh.
To which a few of the priests said, no, that's not what we're going to do. We're just going to stay on our campus, and we're just going to say the rosary out loud.
Okay.
So that's what they did. Well, no one went to the South Bend rally. Everybody went to Notre Dame and prayed the rosary. So no one showed up.
Okay.
So they left. What they left is they went down 94 into Michigan to Coldwater and found the first Catholic church and burned it down.
Wow. Why did they burn down the Catholic church?
Because I guess the connection from Notre Dame Catholics, the Klan was against Catholics. So it burned down the church.
What year was this?
This was like around 1920s, 1930s.
Okay. And then the second time that it was
Second time was in the 60s. And they never found or have no evidence who did it.
Who did it?
And that was one of the sad ones, because after the church was the first time was burned down, all the farmers went into their fields and got the big field stones.
Okay.
And delivered them all, and that's what they used to build the second church, was the field stones from the farmers, and then that one got burned down. So yeah, there was kind of hatred towards Catholics in that area.
Wow. Did they rebuild? I mean, they rebuilt the church. Yeah. So
and it's not had any problems since then.
Wow.
Wow. Things have settled down, I guess, in that area. I'm not sure.
Hopefully.
Yes.
How long were you there as pastor there?
I was there for 5.5 years.
5.5 years. And doing the whole prison ministry.
Yeah, the two big focuses I had is they had a school that was barely functioning. They had about 30 kids when I arrived, and that was K through 5th. And the parish, like I said, the population of that area isn't very Catholic. There's not a big Catholic presence. So my first goal was to get the school going, and you in Coldwater, you had a choice of either Catholic school or public school. And during my first few years there, the public school was really bottoming out. So more and more parents were looking at the Catholic school. And then the Lutheran school in town closed, and those parents refused to send their kids to the public school. So since we were the only other choice, our population went from 35 my first year to when I left, we were over 250. So
Wow.
we had exploded within 5 years just because they did not want to send their kids to public school. And we were the only other alternative.
Wow.
So that looked good on paperwork for my career, because it was like, well, as a pastor, you grew a school that fast, you know what you're doing.
But that's two very different things, the prison and the school. How do you juggle that? That must have been very challenging.
Well, the prison thing was, I always had an idea, because I always wanted to work in prisons. When I was in the seminary, we had to do an outside service project. And so I worked with this home that was run by the sisters that were dedicated to St. John Utes. And St. John Utes was known for going into prisons and doing like mass conversions. And so they ran a home for girls that were under the age of 18 that have committed at least one felony.
Oh, wow.
Now, some of these girls had committed more than one.
Wow.
But they didn't want them in the normal population because what the normal population would do to them. So because they're under 18, they were incarcerated here.
Okay.
So I did 2 years of service with those girls as my service project for the seminary. So I always wanted to do prison work, because I always found it fascinating that it's a group of souls that most people have just discarded.
Given up on,
So my goal with the prison was to turn it into a monastery, because it's pretty much like a monastery. They can't leave. They have very little to do, and they can pray all day. So that's what I started doing, was introducing them to praying the Psalms. Now, in the state of Michigan, because of a Supreme Court case, if you're ever thrown in solitary confinement, they can never take your Bible away from you. It's part of Michigan law. So if they have their Bible, they have their Psalms. So I said, no one can ever take the Psalms away from you, so you can keep praying them. So what I would do is say, pick 3 Psalms, do that in the morning, do it in the afternoon, in the evening, and then got them up to doing it 7 times a day. And that I had 4 or 5 guys doing it, and the effect on them then started affecting the other prisoners, because they were like, well, why are you guys so peaceful? Why are you guys, well, we do this. And so over a process of about 3 years, those guys, I had about 20 guys who were praying 3 Psalms a day, 7 times a day.
So you didn't get any real resistance from them, coming in as a priest, like, don't give me any of that Jesus stuff, or
no. In fact, I think the Muslims that were in the prison were highly respected, because they would, when I'd have to walk in the prison, I'd have to walk from one end to the other to get, it's an outdoor thing, and they would be outside, and that's when they'd walk with you and get all kinds of questions. So you're the one who believes in, the first question is, you're the one who believes in Jesus. And I'd be like, yes. And they'd be like, okay, we don't know much about Jesus, because they don't experience the Christian side. So then, but they knew that I was safe, first of all, because, I don't have no weapon on me. I'm safe. I'm in collar. And they know, to them, is if you keep showing up, then they see that you have an invested interest in them, then they will open up to you. But the priests that would just come in there and like once a month to help out, they wouldn't open up to them, to the same ones that were consistently there every week to be with them. And that's what I do. Every Sunday, I blocked off my Sunday from noon until 4. So I'd go in there and have Mass and then just hang out with them a little bit because they were constricted on time. But over time, what was happening is I was showing up more and more earlier because I was doing more and more confessions, because that's what they didn't understand. They weren't catechized well. But once you catechize them, they're more than willing to do whatever whatever they want the gospel to be for them.
Do you have a lot of conversions?
We did. We used baptisms and everything there all the time. Yeah.
So do you do it in the
prison?
Wow.
And I have to bring everything in, and then everything has to be checked, at the gate, what I'm bringing in and all that. But at that time, it was a men and women's. They were divided. Then by the time I left, it was just men because they had shut the women's part of the prison down. But I found the men more responsive to that than the women. The women more or less saw it as they were doing their time. They're getting out of here. They don't want. They don't want anything else.
Okay.
Where the men were much more trying to at least enrich themselves somehow, so that when they got out, they didn't do it again. Mm-hmm. They were trying to at least then use religion as a vehicle by which they could avoid these future problems.
Was it tough leaving that parish after all that you've done?
It was. And then the letters that you got from prisoners too, because you're not going to see them again. It's like, and they're still stuck there. So, they're not coming out.
Were you able to, go back every once in a while?
I have not been able to do that because just it overwhelming amount of work that us priests get handed.
Do some of them ever get out and seek you out?
Not that I have ever, no one's ever come to me yet and said, I remember you from prison, which would be hilarious.
Just out of nowhere. Hey, I remember you from prison.
With a bunch of parishioners around. What?
Now, after that, I assume that you've had, several different pastor assignments here and there.
Just around in the diocese. Yeah. But that one was the most impressive because when I had done that, there was nothing on my checklist that I wanted to do anymore as a priest because I had done everything. I wanted to work in a prison. I wanted to do, teach classes. I wanted to do pilgrimage. I had done everything that I had on my personal checklist of what I wanted. So I felt more comfortable then as a pastor because I knew that I felt comfortable that everything on my checklist was done.
You've gone through several different parishes now. At what point did you decide that you have to, move down south?
Well, the thing is that I've always had is allergies, but like a good Catholic, I just offer them up because I knew that I knew when given certain medications and then the side effects from them, that I couldn't go down that road. And the doctor was definitely telling me, you can't go down that road. That's dangerous to keep.
So was it getting progressively worse as you got older? Is that how it worked?
I didn't notice it get progressively worse until I changed doctors and I went to a different allergist, and she was like the one who more or less sits you down and then scares the heck out of you because you haven't been taking care of yourself. So it's gotten to the point that if you don't do something, then by the time you're 70 and retire, you're either going to have COPD or you're going to be on oxygen.
Wow.
So if you don't want to do that, then you're going to have to look at environmental changes. Now, the problem with environmental changes is, the diocese doesn't want to renovate every house I live in.
No, yes.
And that's
put a whole HVAC system in and all that.
All the carpeting has to go, all the drapes, any fabrics, everything has to go. So they don't want that expense, and I don't blame them.
Yeah.
So in the process of between the doctors, talking with my bishop, the bishop, me, all this, we thought that the best thing to do would to go to a better environment.
Okay.
So Texas is a far better environment. Now, people would say, well, there's allergies down here. Yes, there are. But the two major problems I have is humidity. And humidity is high in Texas, but it's way higher in Michigan because we're surrounded by lakes.
Okay.
And we're like the 12th highest state in humidity.
Really?
Where Texas is like in the 30s or something like that. So there's less in that sense. So that was that. My biggest allergy is dust mites. So I need to zero humidity they can't reproduce. So
Okay.
any humidity lower works better for that. So what my doctor said is go to Texas, try that for 5 years. If it's not working, then you're going to have to go into a deeper desert area like Arizona or something where it's more desert-like than
a lot drier and a lot. Okay.
Because you can't medicate. So this is the only way is to avoid it. So, or live in a bubble, and you can't do that.
Was there ever any thought in you to just stay where you were and say, if it's going to kill me, it's going to kill me. I'm going to serve the people of my, my parish or my diocese?
Yeah, there was that thought, because it took a while, because the previous bishop asked if I would be willing to do that. But the doctor's reports weren't in, and there was apprehension of me just leaving my people. So it took me
you're
about
invested emotionally,
right? And it took me about 3 years to probably get to the process of saying, okay. And then I think I started noticing it, because I exercise pretty well. I walk about 5 to 7 miles every morning. So I noticed that my respiration, especially since I've turned like 60, because I'm 61 now, where my respiration, I'm noticing it now. It's harder for me to breathe. And then like with this Sahara sands and all this we have now, I'm noticing my respiration is different than when it was, say, 10 years ago. So
you think that God was speaking to you through your body saying, hey,
it's time to go.
Do something else.
Right.
Serve other people in another place.
So what we did is then I have a niece that lived down here, and she knew about the new subdivision that was going in Belleville. So I was able to talk to them before the house was built. So made sure it was built with no carpeting, everything that I needed for my health reasons. And then the house was built to that specification. Then I didn't have to worry about the diocese having to worry about where they're going to put me. So then the next step was what was I going to do for income? Because the diocese is giving me a stipend on my insurance and all that for the Diocese of Kalamazoo, but I still need income just to eat, stuff like that. So that's when my bishop then reached out to this diocese and said that if you give him faculties, he's in good standing, he's a good priest, that he can maybe help out in any way he can. So the first step, of course, was helping out with confession and masses, because that's what's needed the most. But if I can help out in other ways in the diocese, such as teaching classes, doing pilgrimages and stuff like that, I'm open to those things as well. But right now it's just filling wherever the need is.
So at this point, when, we're talking about leaving Michigan, did you think at that point too, like, oh, maybe I can, go on a mission or something out of the country, someplace where the climate is very different, or there's zero humidity as well?
Well, and that's the thing, that a religious order would have given me a better, opportunity, because with the religious order, they could have moved me wherever they are in the world. That would have been better for my allergies. In this case, I guess I'm just open to where our Lord is, through divine providence, is moving me, which, I have about, like I said, in our diocese, we can retire at 70. So I only have like 6 or 9 more years of service left before I retire anyways. And if my health was so bad living up there, then what good would I be able to do that maybe come down here, I could still work for 15, 20 years, that were up there, I could only work for 10.
Maybe even more difficult if you go to like a third world place, and where, the standard of living is a lot more, it's a lot lower and more difficult. Maybe you might have other issues pop up.
Sure, like being allergic to malaria or something.
So for the time being, at least for the next 5 years, you're here in the Houston area, helping around.
Yes, hopefully for the next forever.
We see you here a lot in St. Faustina, because we just lost Father Christopher, because he became administrator in another parish. So we're waiting now for who the new priest is going to be for us, at least the new parochial vicar. So you're filling in the masses and all that as well.
Right.
So the parishes that you help around this area are mainly St. Faustina and St. Bart's? Is that?
Well, mainly it's Epiphany of the Lord.
Epiphany.
And Katie. And then Faustina's, it was Mostly was just confessions, like once or twice a week. But then with Father Christopher leaving to go take his new assignment, then I had more masses. So I'm assuming that once the new priest comes, I'll have less masses, but I'll still be around the area for confessions. At Epiphany, they had Saint Vincent or Father Vincent, who was there, who recently passed away, and that left Father Tom by himself. And then Father Tom was given a new parochial vicar, and he wasn't even there, I don't even think, 2 weeks, and his father passed away. He had to go back to the Philippines, which left Father Tom by himself again.
Okay.
So I was helping out there like 4 or 5 times a week. I kind of was the new parochial vicar of liturgy.
Yeah.
So I helped out there a lot with that, and I was grateful for that because that was helpful to my income as well. So,
and they have a school there too. So
yes,
yeah.
So confessions are there. I helped out with them, the school confessions, but as well as at John the 23rd, the high school confessions too.
So this summer, I know they're going to start moving priests around as well. Is there any inkling, any thought, any talk about you maybe, in the coming fall semester being in any school? Has there been any talk about that?
There's no talk about that because I think for me to be assigned for the archdiocese, I have to be incarnated. I'm not sure exactly how the law is on that.
Okay.
And right now I'm still incarnated in my diocese, just on a leave. And then the archbishop has granted me faculties so that way I can celebrate the masses and help out with that.
So there's a lot of technicalities in canon law and all that when it comes to that.
And it gets time consuming where by the time, if I want to incarnate into your diocese, I would almost be the time to retire.
Oh, okay.
Because there's a process where you have to go there for so long and they agree to it. And so it's not like a quick, just transfer like you do with a company.
How do you address that teaching itch? Are you going to have conferences and stuff like that? Or
Well, right now I do have a talk coming in the future. Sister to Sister group at St. Bartholomew has asked me to come and give them a talk. So I'm open to that. I just haven't really advertised or said anything, other to pastors if they need that, they have that need. But I'm sure that
you're willing to go around and give talks.
And I'll see what doors it opens.
That's cool. Thank you so much.
Because once you do one, then somebody else wants you to do another.
Yeah, word's going to start to spread. Yeah,
exactly.
Thank you so much for coming on the show and telling your story. And we hope to see you around, for the years to come, and hope that your health continues to improve.
I'm glad to be here in Texas.
God bless you, Father.
Thank you.